Sometimes life outside of the house is in fact a better teacher than love inside of the house. I'm going to say that again. Sometimes life outside of the house is a better teacher than love inside of the house. The proverbial writer says to all of us that as parents, we are to train up our children in the way that they should go, that when they are old, they shall not depart. Which furthermore says to all of us that somewhere between the time that we train our children and somewhere between the time that our children blossom into all that God ordains for them to be, there is an in-between phase. And sometimes inside of this in-between phase, our children go wayward. When our children go wayward and begin to do things that many of us as parents did not teach our children to do, we are left in anxiety. We are left in anxiety because now you have to make a decision as to whether or not I'm going to coddle the child or whether or not I'm going to let the child go and release that child into the hands of God. Many of us as parents are frustrated, agitated, and irritated because many of us do not realize the power of releasing your child. Because sometimes life outside of the house is a better teacher than love inside of the house. What are you trying to say, Pastor Beavers? There's some stuff that you've been trying to say to your child, and you've been talking to the child, preaching to the child, and saying to the child over and over and over again, and you sound like a broken record. You sound like a broken record because no matter how much you talk to your child, it seems as if your child has deaf ears. No matter how much you talk to your child, it seems as if your child is not listening to you at this particular moment in time. And when your child is not listening to you, you make up inside of your mind, I've got to release my child, and I really don't feel like it, but it's the best thing for me to let go of my child. I've got to let go of my child because, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes life outside of the house is a better teacher than love that happens to be inside of the house. Here's the difference. You prefer for your child to learn the lesson inside of the house because inside of the house there's love, and in the middle of love, this lesson is an easy lesson. You really don't want them to have to learn the lesson outside of the house because outside of the house there's life, and that's a hard lesson. And so therefore, as a consequence, many of us as parents are stuck because you're trying to make a decision as to whether or not I should coddle my child or as to whether or not I should let my child go. And sometimes you got to put your faith, your hope, and all of your trust in God, and you got to make a decision and come to the understanding that even if I let my child go, they might be out of my hands, but they are not outside of God's hands. Does anybody believe that nobody can fix your child the way that God is able to fix your child? Does anybody believe that nobody can correct your child the way that God is able to correct your child? I've come to the understanding that when you release your child outside of the house and you allow light to teach your child juxtaposed to love teaching your child inside of the house, when God has your child in the palm of their hands, your child is going to get the lesson. And when they get the lesson, you don't have to beg them to come back inside of the church. When they get the lesson, you don't have to beg them to come back to God. You don't have to beg them to come back to the faith. You don't have to beg them to come to Bible study. But there's something about life that when life teaches you, you don't have to beg them to come back. They come running back to the house of God. One of my pet peeves is that many of us as parents, especially inside of the church, you act like you ain't never sinned. You act like you ain't never fallen short of the glory of God. You act like you Jesus Jr. and Jesus Jr. Red. But for the rest of us in here under the sound of my voice, you can attest to the reality. I ain't got to hide nothing from my child. And the reason I don't have to hide anything from my child, I sound like a broken record, but the child doesn't realize I'm preaching so hard because I already been there, done that, got the t-shirt and the coffee mug to prove it. You think you doing something new? You ain't doing nothing new. I've been there before. I've walked a mile inside of your shoes, and sometimes you got to release your child outside of the house, because sometimes life outside of the house is a better teacher than love inside of the house. Such is the case inside of biblical history. Ladies and gentlemen, it is quite interesting to note that when it is that we do a hard contrast inside of the Bible, there's an extreme difference between the father of the prodigal son in Luke chapter number 15 and the father by the name of Eli, who happens to be a priest in 1 Samuel chapter number 2. They are similar in the sense due to the fact that both the father of the prodigal son and Eli, who happens to be a priestly father in 1 Samuel chapter number 2, they both have wayward sons. What amazes me is not that their sons have gone wayward, but what amazes me, ladies and gentlemen, is that they handle their wayward sons in an entirely different manner. The Bible declares in 1 Samuel chapter number 2 that Eli is a priest, and as a priest, Eli has two sons by the name of Hophni and Phinehas. His two sons by the name of Hophni and Phinehas are stereotypical in 2017 of what we call PKs. Don't act like you don't know what a PK is. We call them preacher's kids. Even if it's not the truth, preachers' kids get a bad rap of taking advantage of the position of their father, taking advantage of the position of their parents. Just because their father is in a powerful position, they think they can say anything to anybody, do anything to anybody. And sometimes the folk that keep up the most havoc inside of the church are the preachers' kids. Eli in 1 Samuel chapter number 2 has preachers' kids. Eli is a priest, and his kids are in the lineage to become the next priest. But the Bible declares that even though he's serving the Lord, his kids are crooked all at the same time. What makes his children, Hophni and Phinehas, crooked? They are crooked, number one, because in 1 Samuel chapter number 2, the children of Eli are stealing offerings outside of the temple. Every time somebody goes to the temple in order to get an offering, it is Hophni and Phinehas, the children of Israel, watch this, who steal the offering before people ever have the chance to sacrifice the offering. It's the equivalent in 2017 of you giving your tithe and offering to the church, your hard-earned money to the church. You expect the church to do the right thing by the money that you place inside of the church, and out of all of the people who could steal the money, it's not the preacher, it's his children all at the same time. His sons are crooked in 1 Samuel chapter number 2, not just because they are stealing offerings, but number 2, they are crooked because there are women who come to the temple to worship God, but when they come to the temple to worship God, out of all of the people who could do this, it is the sons of Eli who are seducing the women and sleeping with the women inside of the temple. Here it is, his sons are getting ready to be the next priest. As a priest, it is your responsibility to intercede on behalf of the people. But what happens when the one who's supposed to intercede on behalf of you and God is the one that's standing in the way and blocking you from getting to God? Such is the case in 1 Samuel chapter number 2. What amazes me is not that his sons are crooked, but what amazes me is that instead of Eli correcting his sons in 1 Samuel chapter number 2, he does like many of us as parents. He tries to coddle his sons. Everybody knows that his son is bad. Everybody knows that his sons are bougie. They bad and bougie all at the same time. Everybody knows that his sons have lost their everlasting mind. Everybody knows that his sons have gone crazy, and folk on the outside are saying to Eli, you got a problem with your sons. And Eli, like many of us as parents, watch this, he takes the mentality, I can talk about my sons, but you can't talk about my sons. Don't act like y'all don't know that mentality. You know when your child been cut up in school and the teacher calls the house about your child, you go up to the school, and instead of you seeing about your child, you have the nerve and the audacity to start clowning on the teacher. It ain't the teacher's fault that your child is acting up. You got to make up inside of your mind that I've got to learn how to correct my child. He has the mentality, I know my child is acting up. He says, I just don't want you to say anything about my child. He refuses to correct his children, but instead he coddles his children. And 2 chapters later, in 1 Samuel chapter number 4, the Bible declares that both of his sons, Hophni and Phinehas, they die in the middle of war. And shortly after his sons died, he falls backwards, and this father by the name of Eli breaks his own neck and he dies. So notice what happens. His sons are wayward, but instead of correcting his sons, he tries to coddle his sons, and the end result is everybody inside of the house dies. I need you to look at your neighbor and tell your neighbor that's a sad story. Come on, I need you to shout it to the whole east side here. Just somebody shout, that's a sad story. On the other hand, there's another father in Luke chapter number 15 who happens to be the father of the prodigal son, and his son is gone wayward, but he handles it in a totally opposite way. His son has gone wayward inside of the house, so much to the point that the son has the nerve and the audacity. He starts smelling himself and he steps to his father. He says, give me the portion of my inheritance, not when you die. Give it to me right now. Now watch this. His son is a Jew, and by Jewish culture, the second son was to get a third of all of their father's estate. But here's the thing, you are not supposed to get the estate until your father dies. So when the son says to the father, give me my inheritance right now, what he's really saying to the father, I don't care how hard you work, I wish you were dead. What he's really saying to the father, in spite of all of your sacrifice on my behalf, I wish you were dead. What he's really saying to the father, in spite of you coming to my little league football games, I wish you were dead. What he's really saying to the father, in spite of all that you've invested inside of my life, I wish you were dead. And instead of the father cuddling the son, he does the exact opposite of what my mama did to me when I was 17 years old. Don't act like I'm the only one. When I was 17 years old, I ain't been a preacher my whole life. I started smelling myself. And when I started smelling myself, I decided I didn't want to live under the rules of this house. I didn't want to be up under my parents' jurisdiction. I thought I was grown. I thought that I knew what life was all about. And watch this. I said, Mama, I'm getting ready to leave this house. And when I said I'm getting ready to leave this house, that was the worst thing I could have ever told my mama. She did the exact opposite of the father of the prodigal son. When the son said to the father in Luke 15, I'm getting ready to leave, he gave him all of his inheritance and helped him out the house. But when I told my mama I was getting ready to leave, she says, okay, you can leave, but wait a minute, take all them clothes off. I bought them clothes. She says, you can leave, but wait just 1 minute. Not only do you need to take all them clothes off, leave that car inside of the garage. I bought that car. She says, you can leave. She says, but get outside of my room. I said, Mama, that's my room. She said, your room is inside of my house. You don't have a room. In other words, she made up inside of her mind that you can leave, but you're not going to take everything that I poured into you with you. You got to learn this lesson all by yourself, because sometimes life outside of the house is a better teacher than love inside of the house. Such is not the case with the father of the prodigal son. You would think that with his son being so ungrateful that the father would be mad that his son says, I wish you were dead. Give me my inheritance right now. But instead of coddling his son and blocking him from leaving, he allowed his son to leave the house. I can imagine that he allowed his son to leave the house because he was tired of preaching until he was blue in the face. I can imagine that he allowed his son to leave the house because he was tired of sounding like a broken record. I can imagine that he allowed his son to leave the house because he was tired of having to go to the doctor and get surgery on his vocal cords discouraged from telling his son the same thing over and over and over again. So he allows his son to leave the house. And when he allows his son to leave the house, the end result is that his son came to himself. And when his son came to himself, he didn't have to beg for his son to come running back home. His son came running back home because life sent him back home. So notice the case. You have two fathers. Luke chapter number 15, the father of the prodigal son. 1 Samuel chapter number 2, a father by the name of Eli. Two different fathers. Both of them have wayward sons. One father coddles his son and the whole house dies. The other father allows his son to leave, and the Bible declares that eventually the son comes back in his right mind and they throw a party inside of the house and there's joy inside of the house. Here's the difference. In 1 Samuel chapter number 2, Eli loved his son too much to let him go. But in Luke chapter number 15, the father of the prodigal son loved his son too much to let him stay. And sometimes when you are a father and your son has gone wayward, sometimes when you are a father and your son has lost their everlasting mind, you got to fight for your son by loving them enough to let them go. Y'all don't like me, but I'm going to preach it anyhow. I'm going to say it again. Sometimes when your son has gone wayward, you got to fight for your son by loving them enough to let them go. You got to be willing to trust God, that God, my only prayer is that they get the lesson. Whether they get it inside of the house, whether they get it outside of the house, any way you bless me, I'll be satisfied. I just want them to get the lesson. And Lord, please don't let it be fatal. Is there anybody in here under the sound of my voice who knows exactly what it is to talk to your child until your child is blue in the face, and eventually you got to turn your child over and put them into the hands of God? When you put them into the hands of God, here's your hope. Your hope is that you used to be a hot mess and God saved you. So if God saved me, and I know I used to be a hot mess, the same God who's able to save me is the same God who's able to save my child. If God saved me, and I know I used to be a hot mess, the same God who delivered me is the same God who's able to deliver my child. I speak over every child that has gone wayward in here under the sound of my voice. The devil will not hold a death grip on your child, but he must loose them and let them go in the name of Jesus. It might not be today, it might not be tomorrow, but your child is getting ready to come back home. I dare you to high five your neighbor and tell your neighbor, I know that's right. This is why I try to teach with something else with the headset, because when I get the mic, I get the preacher. Now, I dare you to high five your neighbor and tell him again, I know that's right. There are certain lessons that ungrateful children cannot learn until they step outside the house. Somebody just missed it. I think I'll say it again. There are certain lessons that ungrateful children cannot learn until they step outside the house. Because sometimes life outside of the house is a better teacher than love that is inside of the house. Somebody shout, I know that's right. The first lesson that they learn when they get outside of the house, when fathers love their sons enough to let them go, lesson number one, children learn no matter how much I have, it's a waste without God. I need you to shout it to the whole east side. Here's you. Everybody repeat after me with uplifted voices. No matter how much I have, it's a waste without God. Watch this. I don't care what kind of car you drive. Your car ain't going to make you happy. If you are not connected to God, it's a waste without the Father. I don't care how much money you have. Your money is not going to make you happy. If you are not connected to God, it's a waste without the Father. I don't care what kind of clothes you wear. You wear Versace, 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 Versace. Watch this. If you are not connected to God, it's a waste without the Father. Such is the case inside of the text. I really don't have anything else to preach except for the Bible. The Bible declares in Luke chapter number 15, starting with verse number 13, that the Father gives his inheritance to the Son. The Son leaves and goes to a far country. And when he leaves and goes to a far country with his inheritance, he should be set for the rest of his life. But although he leaves set for the rest of his life, the scripture says he wastes all of his substance on riotous living. Another translation says he wastes all of his substance on loose living. Can I give you the ghetto version, the NLT version? The New Living Translation says, watch this, he wastes all of his inheritance on harlots. Can I preach it where somebody can reach it? He made up inside of his mind, I'm tired of living in my mama's house, and I'm tired of living in Birmingham. So when I get out of Birmingham, I'm going to move to Atlanta. But when he went to Atlanta, he messed around and went to the Magic City Strip Club. And the Bible declares that he didn't just give one tip, but he kept tipping and tipping and tipping until all that he had was gone at the same time. He didn't just give one tip, he went into a tip drill until all that he had was gone at the same time. Can I preach it where somebody can reach it? The Bible declares that he wasted all of his substance on harlots, all of his substance on prostitutes. Maybe he didn't go to Magic City. He stayed right inside of Birmingham and says, I'm going to the volcano, because he wanted to see something that was explosive. He wanted to see something that he had never seen inside of his life. And when he got inside of the volcano, he says, I ain't gonna put but 5 on it, but 5 turned into 10, and 10 turned into 15, and 25, 35, 45, 55. He wasted all of his substance on riotous living. It was Dr. Thomas Chappelle, our pastor emeritus. I'm so glad that he's still with us here on today, who used to teach all of us inside of the New Rising Star Church, that's what sin will do to you. It'll make you go further than you want to go. It'll make you stay longer than you want to stay. It'll make you spend more than you want to spend. This is the reason you can't hang around and play around with sin, because you think that you're strong enough to handle it, but before you know it, you get sucked into the web, you get caught into the web, and you begin to waste all of your substance on riotous living. The first lesson that the son has to learn outside of the house, because love couldn't teach it to him inside of the house, watch this, no matter how much I have, it's all a waste without God. Does anybody believe that? That's why the songwriter Vasson Mitchell painted this picture. He says, I've searched all over and I can't find nobody. I've looked high and low and I still can't find nobody. Nobody greater than you. The old people used to sing the same song on this wise: can't nobody do me like Jesus. Can't nobody do me like the Lord. In other words, life without God, tweet this out, is like an unsharpened pencil is pointless. I'm going to say it again. Life without God is like an unsharpened pencil is pointless. What amazes me is not that this son lost his inheritance. He lost his inheritance outside of the presence of his father. He wasted his inheritance outside of the presence of his father. Whenever you're outside of the presence of your heavenly father, no matter how much you have, it's still a waste. That's lesson number 1. Here's lesson number 2. When fathers love their sons enough to let them go, the lesson they learn outside of the house that life teaches them, that love could not teach them inside of the house, here it is never say never. I need us to shout it together with uplifted voices to the whole east side. Here's you. Everybody shout, never say never. How do I know that he learns this lesson, never say never? He comes from a privileged family. His family is so privileged that his father, watch this, not only has children, his father has servants who are working all over the campus of his property. Servants are working on behalf of this father. And the Bible declares, ladies and gentlemen, that even though servants are working on behalf of his father, you can imagine as a young child, because he's privileged, perhaps he said in his mind, there's some stuff I would never do. You got to be careful when you say you'd never do something. Did y'all hear what I just said? Do you understand the words that are coming outside of my mouth? You got to be careful when you say, I'd never do something. For many of us, we say, I'd never do it. And the truth is, you just ain't had the opportunity. You in here singing, thing that I used to do, I don't do no more. Places I used to go, I don't go no more. When the truth is, you just got too old to do it and too old to go there. Your stuff don't work like it used to work. Never say never. How do I know that he learned the lesson? How do I know that he learned the lesson? Watch this. He learned the lesson because this son was a Jewish son. Spends all of his substance. Bible declares that a famine comes inside of the land. No food, no water. So now he has to learn the hard lesson. He used to have a lot of free time. Now he has to get a job and clock his hours. What a wonderful lesson for all of our children to learn who think they got it made in the shade. Your mama was just like mine. She used to always tell me, you must think money grow on trees, don't you? You must think money grow on trees, don't you? Somebody in here know my mama. Y'all mama told y'all the same thing? But it's a whole different ball game when you step out of the house and you got to get your own job. It's a whole different ball game when you step out of the house and you got to take care of your own needs. Can't depend on mama. So watch this. Out of all of the jobs that he could get, the Bible declares in Luke 15, verses 15 through 16, that this Jewish boy joins himself to somebody in this far country who has a field of pigs and says, this is your new job. This is what I want you to do. Feed my pigs. He's a Jew. According to Leviticus chapter number 11, Jews declared pigs unclean. And because pigs are unclean, they wouldn't touch pigs lest they become unclean. Matter of fact, not only would they not touch pigs, they wouldn't touch anything that the pig touches lest they become unclean. Now watch this. That's Old Testament. In the New Testament, God made all things new. For all my bacon eaters, you had some bacon before you came to church this morning. You had some sausage before you came to church this morning. Don't be tripping. Don't be acting like you don't want no Jimmy Nicks for Father's Day after this is all over. The devil is a lie. I smell Jimmy Nicks right now, and I'm on the way. But he was of the mindset, I don't eat swine. You know, you get uppity. You don't even call that pork no more. I don't eat swine. I don't eat bacon. I don't eat sausage. So you can imagine that because he's a Jew, as a young child, he frowns his nose down upon people who eat pigs. Frowns his nose upon people who work with pigs, who touch pigs. And you can imagine he's saying, I'll never do that. But you got to be careful when you say what you never do. He's so privileged that he's critical of other people. He has it so good as a young child that he doesn't realize what it takes to make it on his own, and he's critical as a young child. And I want to parenthetically insert this. You don't have to live in Mount Brook to have a privileged mentality. You don't have to live in Vestavia Hills to have a privileged mentality. You don't have to live in Homewood to have a privileged mentality. You don't have to be living behind the gates off of 280 to have a privileged mentality. You can still have a privileged mentality living in Gate City if you got good parents who point into you and do more for you than what's required. You begin to take their kindness as a weakness, and you begin to take them for granted. You think they owe you something, they don't owe you nothing, and now you privileged and you ain't even got nothing. Has a mentality, I never do that, because pigs are unclean. And many of our children got the same mentality. I never be like my father, and the one you said you'd never be like, you end up being just like him. I'd never be like my mama, and the one you said you'd never be like, you end up being just like her. I never become an alcoholic, and the thing you said you never do, you end up doing. I never smoke crack cocaine, and the thing you said you never do, you end up doing. I never have a child out of wedlock, and the thing you said you never do is the same thing that you end up doing. It's kind of like Paul in Romans chapter number 7. He says, when I would do good, even evil is always present. He says the things that I want to do, I never end up doing. And the things that I don't want to do, I always end up doing. Oh, wretched man is I. He learns the lesson outside of the house that life teaches him, that love can't teach him inside of the house. Never say never. That's lesson number 2. Lesson number 3. Sometimes you got to love them enough to let them go. Because sometimes life outside of the house is a better teacher than love inside of the house. What's the third thing that he learned outside of the house? Watch this. When we love our children enough to let them go, they learn the lesson, life owes me nothing. I need you to shout it together with uplifted voices. 1, 2, ready, say it. Life, oh. Come on. We say it like we in the LD class. I need you to be in the AP class. Everybody say it again. Life owes me nothing. How do I know that he learns this lesson? Spends all of his substance on riotous living. Luke chapter number 15, around verse number 16. The Bible declares that when he hits rock bottom, because now he has nothing, pigs are being filled with food. And when pigs are getting full, he's starving to death. He's hit rock bottom, and sometimes you got to thank God when your child hits rock bottom. Here's the perspective. You say, I don't want to thank God for my child hitting rock bottom. Thank God for your child hitting rock bottom. When you hit rock bottom, ain't nowhere to go but up. Somebody just missed it. I'm going to say it again. When you hit rock bottom, ain't nowhere to go but up. So watch this. After hitting rock bottom, the Bible declares, Luke 15, verse number 16, no man gave to him. Luke 15, verse 17, and he came to himself. Now, you've heard this message several times, and every time you get to this part of the scripture, and he came to himself, you start running around the church. You start high-fiving your neighbor. You start shouting. You start bucking and jumping and going cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And he came to himself. But have you not considered the only reason he could come to himself in verse 17 is because no man gave to him, and people stopped enabling him in his foolishness in verse number 16. You want to know the reason our children don't come to himself? Because as parents, we substitute ourselves in the place of God. You don't let the child fall, but you're always there to catch them. And because you are always there to catch them, they never get the lesson. Because you are always there to catch them, they never get the memo. Sometimes you got to love your child enough to let them fall, because if they don't get the lesson, they're going to keep on doing the same thing. You want to know the reason they spend up all their money? Because they know they got 2 bank accounts. So they spend all the money in their bank account, then they ask you to put 5 on it and spend all the money in your bank account. You want to know why they drive so reckless? Because they know you're going to bail them out. What it means, when I wreck this car, my mama just going to get me another car. You want to know why they act the way they act? Because they know even if I go to jail, mama going to always be there to bail me out. You got to make up inside of your mind, I'm going to stop enabling my child in their foolishness. And when we stop playing the role of God, our children will finally come to themselves. Can you imagine? He once had everything. He's in a far country. Now he has nothing. And this man who had everything is now begging, can I get $1? This man who now has nothing is now begging, can you give me a ride? This man who has nothing is now holding a sign on the street that says, we'll work for food. This man who once had everything is now holding a sign, I'm hungry and I'll work and do whatever you ask me to do. And can you imagine all of the people passing him by on the road? On the outside, it looks like they're being mean. They're not being mean. Sometimes the more you help people, the more you hurt people. You got to make up inside of your mind, I'm going to stop enabling them in their foolishness. I don't owe them nothing. Sometimes you got to allow people to sit in their mess. Sometimes you got to allow the child to sit in the bed that they made themselves, ladies and gentlemen, in order to learn this lesson, life owes me nothing. Lesson number 4. Everybody say lesson number 4. Need you to say it real ghetto. I didn't say 4, I said 4. Lesson number 4. When fathers love their sons enough to let them go, number 4, sons learn the lesson. The grass is not always greener on the other side. Notice what happens when he comes to himself. Luke chapter number 15, verse number 17. The son starts comparing his present, which is terrible, to his past, which was wonderful. He says, wait a minute, how many hired servants does my father have? And even the servants have enough bread to eat and enough bread to give away to somebody else in need. And I got the nerve to be starving and dying of hunger? He's comparing his current place, which is terrible, to his former place where he had it made in the shade. Which says to all of us, they got to learn the lesson. Grass ain't always greener on the other side. He couldn't see it when he was in his father's house. He wanted to get outside of the house. He was tired of abiding by the rules of his father. He was tired of his father saying, I need you to be home at 12 p.m. He says, I'm 18. How in the world you going to make me be home at 12 p.m.? Can I pause to tell somebody, I don't care how old you are, if your parents still support you financially, you ain't grown. So on one hand, you ask your parents for help, but on the other hand, you don't want them to give their opinion. It don't work like that. If they helping you, they got a right to tell you what they think. If they helping you, they got a right to speak into your life. Talking about you grown, one day you're going to wish you had a father who's still around to be able to speak into your life. You better thank God for your father while you still got him. It ain't always greener on the other side. He says, I don't have to live this way. I could go home and they're living a whole lot better than what I'm living, and they're not even children of my father. They're just servants. He compares his current place, which is terrible, to his former place where he had it made in the shade. He has to realize that sometimes when it looks like the grass is greener on the other side, it's just a green light shining on brown grass. Sometimes when it looks like the grass is greener on the other side, you get up to the grass and you find out it's really artificial astroturf. It ain't real. He had to love him enough to let him go. Because sometimes life outside of the house is a better teacher than love inside of the house.